So welcome back. My name's Damien and I'm leading this month's Monday nights. And so the topic, my general topic for the whole month is really trying to find the courage to look at things in life that maybe are a little bit difficult to look at and to investigate in an objective, sort of an objective manner. So we're very skillful at looking at other people in a subjective manner, which means that, you know, we're quite happy to offer our opinions of others, you know, really sort of, she's this, she's that, you know, they got this problem, that problem, she said this, she said that, how could she, you know, so we're very definite when it comes to analysing others and the faults of others and, you know, the way others are acting. We're very courageous and potent in the way that we do that. But when it comes to ourselves, we're quite reluctant to face any faults or imperfections within ourselves. So certainly a big part of the Buddhist sort of approach is to be honest with yourself, to actually have to look at yourself and to honestly and sincerely see and accept various difficulties or faults or problems within yourself. And the idea is that on the basis of actually identifying those problems, then we have a good chance to rectify them. So, you know, we have sort of, last week we talked about the suffering of change, which is, you know, a particular sort of view of reality that maybe we had not thought of before. So that's something that we can look at in a fairly, you know, sort of almost a non-personal way. But tonight I want to talk about what we call delusions or afflictions. So the afflictions are, you know, states of mind, or they're mental factors. They're mental factors that accompany our perception of things. So, for instance, that when I see let's call them my enemy, when I see my enemy, you know, somebody that I believe is trying to harm me, somebody that I sincerely believe is trying to harm me, then by seeing them and holding that perception of them, first of all I generate some aversion, and first of all, even before aversion, there's a sense of dislike. So there's a progression of our mental strength here. So the first thing that the person walks into the room, the first thing I feel is dislike. And then aversion, something a little bit stronger. And maybe I'm starting to remember or to embellish the problem or the things that I see in that person that I dislike. So there's first of all, there's dislike, aversion, anger, and then, you know, even to hatred. So there's a whole process that goes on here, and it's good to understand that process, and we'll talk a little bit about it. But let's just, we have this situation where I am angry, and so there's several things that we can look at. Normally when we're experiencing anger, the only thing that fills our mind is the perception of this unwanted, undesirable situation. So the situation here is that my enemy, who I dislike, is close to me. You know, they've come into my space or into this thing, and my mind is thinking about them. And because of that, I generate an aversion, and I generate maybe anger even. And the basic feeling of anger is I want to be rid of that problem. I want this problem to go away. I want to be free of this problem. And so, out of that feeling, we then can become abusive. We might even be physically aggressive. But certainly we may be aggressive in terms of our speech, and there's no question that we will be hostile and aggressive in terms of our thinking. Okay, but whatever happens, the basic feeling is that we want to be free of this difficulty, this suffering. We see it as a form of suffering, and we want to be free of it. But the feeling inside is that I want to hurt, or I want to eliminate this suffering in a sort of a hostile manner. So, we can observe that process. And similarly, if we think of something very, a person that we are very strongly attracted to, similarly walks into the room, our mind is drawn to that person. And it's interesting, in either the case of the anger or that strong attachment, in both cases, our mind is drawn like a magnet. It's like a really strong magnet that just draws our mind and locks in on that object in a very sort of almost an uncontrollable way. For us, normally, the way we normally behave is that anger or the lust sort of mind locks onto the object in almost an uncontrollable way. And so the mind is sort of stuck on that object, and then my internal thinking becomes, like in the case of attachment, becomes one of wanting, that grasping and feeling that you really lack something that will be like a true sense of happiness. So in the case of lust, there's this sort of just this an apprehension that if I possessed this person, I would be truly happy. So there's all these sort of senses of that expectation. There's expectation. There's anticipation. There's this sort of belief of true happiness if I possessed this person. And so when the situation is, for instance, interfered with by somebody else, or even interfered with by that person who says, I'm just not interested. So when that interference comes, then we find that strong emotional thing, there's then the frustration, there's the sense of loss, the grief, the loneliness, and even the possibly some aggression and a whole lot of negativity can follow from that. So these are processes that we should look at, so in terms of this month's topic, this is where I'd like us to go, is to start looking at the way that we experience these different emotions. So similarly, pride, particularly in this context, what we call afflicted pride. So afflicted pride, and the thing to sort of note here, is that many of these afflictions are in complete contradiction to what in this society becomes valued. In this society, there are certain things that are valued that, if you start examining them, they are in contradiction to these ideas. And it's good to understand that contradiction. So, for instance, in this society, Aggression, to a large degree, is valued quite highly, whether it's in the sporting context or the business context, or even in you know, the way people work with each other in the workplace, or whatever. That the go-getter, the standing up for your rights, that sort of stand up and fight mentality is highly valued in this society. And we have to check whether that is promoting internal hostility. You know, if we are not careful, we can take the language of that go-getter business. You know, you got to, what's the saying about dog eat dog? You know, it's a dog eat dog world. This is the way it operates. Hostility, you know, you have to be on top and make sure the other person doesn't get in first. There's just this whole cultivation of hostility in society, which we should understand. We should see that and understand it. But the reason that it's so prevalent in society as a whole is because in me as an individual, it is just as prevalent. So we can't go into the mindset of blaming society for these situations, because, and this is what I'm sort of encouraging here, if we really start to look inside, we can see within ourselves the habituation or the engagement or the indulgence in hostility, in grasping attachment, in a pride that separates and tries to elevate ourselves above others. So here what we call afflicted pride. Afflicted pride is basically a feeling, you know, a mental feeling where you are separating yourself from others and trying to elevate yourself in sort of dominance or in superiority to others. So in Buddhism there's another term about pride, which is actually a positive quality. So there's a positive quality of pride, which is the pride of personal courage and confidence in knowing that you are capable to do something, say, virtuous. So there's you know that you're capable of, let's say, benefiting others. And so then there's in English it's the same word, pride. So there is a pride in that capability of yourself. But it's important to look at that and see how that type of pride is not competitive. It's not relying on putting another group or another person down so that you can feel up. So afflicted pride is the sort of pride where if you actually examine it, you start to examine it, you see that here I am doing one of three things, however many fingers I put up, one of three things. Somebody who's really great, you think you're equal to them. You know, you think that you're Mahatma Gandhi, you know, your kindness is Mahatma Gandhi-ish. Or, you know, somebody, you're sort of elevating yourself beyond reality and you're thinking you're equal to somebody great. And then there's the pride that those that are actually equal with you, that you're superior to them. You know, so again, it's sort of like you're taking this other whole group and you're pushing them down to lift yourself up in your own mind. And then there's the pride in relation to the people who are maybe less fortunate than yourself, less wealthy, less skillful, less educated, and you're pushing them down even further and trying to elevate yourself up. And so then you have a pride of like referring to other people as scum or non-human or, you know, like, you know, bizarre, you know, low lives, all this sort of mentality, you know, where you're elevating your own position up even to those that are less fortunate than yourself. And so that's also an aspect of pride. So these are things to examine within yourself. But so this afflicted pride has got this particular aspect of elevating yourself up and pushing others down. So we can check within ourselves, in our workplace, or in our, even you think back to your school days, or you think to something or other, and you can check whether you find that you're doing one of these three things. You're putting yourself up on the level of the genius. You're elevating yourself above your equals, or you're pushing the less fortunate than yourself even lower down. You're pushing them down to elevate your own self-opinion. So you can check in relation to your friends, your family, your work colleagues. You can check whether or not you're doing this type of thing. And so similarly, we've got the whole question of jealousy. And jealousy, again, is an afflicted state of mind. So the situation where jealousy arises is that I'm sitting here in the Gompa and somebody walks in and they're really well dressed. They look really nice, they're beautiful, and so your mind, you've got at least two choices in your mind. But we can look at two of the choices you've got in your mind. You can have a sense of delight that a person can be so well groomed, so well dressed, so healthy, attractive, imposing, charismatic. There's all these sorts of possibilities. And that can actually, when we see that, we can think, wow, that's fantastic. And it lifts you up, a good feeling. Or you can have the jealousy, if jealousy interferes, and you just have this sort of real resentment that they possess any of these things. And so we have this very negative thing that we find no joy at all in seeing such a person. And we just have this very down thinking, very sort of resentful, despising them, not happy at all at their success or their appearance or their charisma or their clothes or their hair or their shoes. Even though nobody wears shoes in here, you still might resent their shoes. You might resent their socks. Who knows? Jealousy will find something to resent about another person. So to see that, and so here the real quality that I'm trying to encourage is if we can look nakedly at our own experience and own up to the way that the afflictions work in my own mind. Okay, so and this is a bitter taste to tackle, because it's not, for what we find, it's not actually pleasant to look at yourself in a very honest way and own up to our own faults. Okay, it is difficult, but there is a huge benefit in being able to do it, because so one of the benefits is that it can be a motivator. So until you understand that how prevalent anger is, I used to think that I didn't get angry. Many years ago I used to think I didn't get angry, and I think to some degree my worst habituation is more on the attachment side than it is on the angry side. So we all have a different balance of our various habituations. Some of us are strongly habituated to anger. Some of us are strongly habituated to lust and attachment. Some of us are more strongly habituated to jealousy or resentment, some of these sorts of things. Some of us are more strongly habituated to pride. Okay? And some of us are more strongly habituated just to a sort of an ignorance, just a sort of dull ignorance. So each one of us is different. So I didn't have much problem in admitting that I had a problem with attachment. But I used to think that I wasn't very angry. But the more that I investigated, I started to see that even within me being predominantly my problems being to do with attachment, I could see that anger was just as pervasive and just as present. So then from that, I then sort of understand that, you know, instead of zoning out when they start talking about patience, I had to sort of pay a bit more attention and put in some more effort on that front than I thought I needed to. But I think we're all like that. We will have hidden areas of our personality that we have just not faced. And so here, I guess the real encouragement that I'm seeking to give you is have the courage to face the presence of every delusion within yourself and understand it. You know, really that is like the one key message of this month's Monday nights that I'm trying to communicate, is trying to get that point of the courage and honesty to look at yourself, and using this language of afflictions and understanding this process of the way we see things and then our reaction to them, the emotions and that I generate, and just seeing what is happening there. See those emotions within yourself, you know. So on the basis of that, there's a couple of, as I said, there's a couple of things. One is that it can inspire us to do something about it. You know, we can start to, by that observation, we can be a little bit more on the ball and see those afflictions arising when they are arising. You know, like when they're just starting to generate, you know, that somebody walks into the room, your enemy, and, you know, that instantaneous glance, within that first moment, the affliction starts to arise. And I think we can tune ourselves to actually see that. And then if we start to see that, even seeing it and owning up to it will prevent the out-of-control growth of anger, for instance, or the out-of-control growth of lust and attachment, the out-of-control, you know, superior pride sensation. It can sort of, even seeing it will help reduce that. And then the more we learn, we can start to apply antidotes that can overcome it. But I think the first thing that happens is that you have to be able to see it. Okay. So the other really important thing that it can do is that if I own up to the possession of afflictions within myself, if I can own up to the presence of anger, the presence of attachment, the presence of ignorance, jealousy, pride, etc., if I can own up to that, then when I see somebody else do something very harmful, very miserly, a thief, a liar, a cheat, a robber, a killer, a despot, you know, a corrupter, when we see anybody else, there's two things we can do. We can understand where that comes from, you know, that the actions will follow. If you generate anger, the actions that are generated from anger will follow unless you prevent them, and that the actions that generate from anger will be actions that harm others. So one of the real, I'll use the term benefits of understanding the delusions within myself is that I can understand the delusions in others. And so from that, there comes a couple of things. One is that then when we then see somebody else getting really, really angry, there's a couple of things that should be a consequence. The first one is you see the person really getting angry and you should think, I must really make sure I never get angry. So you apply the example of the other person to yourself because you're actually seeing the consequences of letting anger go unchecked. So when you see somebody else getting really angry, if you can have the thought, that is a reminder to me that I must not get angry. And then the second thing that can happen is that the judgmental mind, where we become so superior to somebody else because we see them doing something wrong. You know, you see a person has murdered their partner or their mother, or they're murdered themselves and their whole family. You can see that, you can say, this is the consequence of anger unchecked. And so you know, in a way, we can have sympathy for that person, that they had no techniques in their possession that enabled them to curb their anger. They had nothing in their mind that enabled them to be able to curb and control and defeat their own anger. And because of that, they have fallen into these actions, these terribly shocking, cruel actions, and they've actually killed other people or they've harmed other people. And the reason is that in their mind they had nothing that could curb or diminish their anger. And so that, you know, to see that, and so this is the basis for why we might have compassion for the killer or the murderer or the thief or the, you know, the perpetrator of any crime, is that we can have sympathy for them, that they had nothing in their mind that was able to curb or stop that afflicted thinking. And that's something very sad, that a person can kill their partner, kill their mother, kill their children, and the reason is that there is nothing within their thinking that is able to have them curb, control, diminish their anger. You know, that's, when you think about it, that's a huge loss for that person. And so what the thought transformation techniques in Buddhism, what they're trying to do is to give us the tools that enable me to see my anger, apply some antidote to curb or diminish that anger, so that as a result, I will not act. I will not act out of that anger. And similarly, with the strong attachment or grasping sort of attachment, there's techniques that enable me again to not act at that attachment, to not follow that thought, to diminish the power of that thought, even to remove it, and for me then to not act out of that attachment, not act out of the jealousy, not act out of the pride, you know, not walk around with your head in the air and treating people as though they're all your servants, etc. That sort of behaviour. So the only way we can do that, we have to see it, we have to understand what it is, we have to find the antidote, and then we have to apply the antidote. And then in that process, then we can prevent ourselves from falling into that trap that somebody else will fall into if they have nothing in their mind that can resist those afflictions. So I hope you can see the role of compassion here. The role of compassion here is just seeing what a terrible loss or what a terrible situation it is that somebody becomes completely prone to their anger and they act out the anger because within their mind there is nothing that can stop it. You know, that they completely lack any ability to soften or diminish their anger or their attachment or their pride or their jealousy. And really that should be seen as a great loss for that person. So for ourselves, we need to be able to do this looking, looking at within myself, the way that anger or attachment, jealousy, pride, etc., ignorance, the way that they work. And so the thing that can really help with that is meditation. And there's sort of this requirement for this self-introspection. We want to develop this introspective quality so that we can see this. And so introspection is a consequence, from our engaging meditation practice, we can develop both mindfulness and introspection, and that enables us to become a lot more aware of what's happening in our mind. So when we do a meditation practice, we're not just looking for the 5 minutes peace and relaxation of that 5 minutes. What we're really trying to do is enter the meditation with the motivation that I want to be able to discipline or control my own mind. I want to be able to control my own mind. All my life I've tried to control others, but here for the first time I'm really, really aspiring to control my own mind, to see these afflictions and to engage in overcoming them. And so we do meditation practice with that motivation. It's not just for the 5 minutes of peace and relaxation. It's not just for 5 minutes of daydreaming. The aim is that we are trying to develop these mental skills of being able to see and to be in the moment and see the thought processes and the presence of the afflictions, and that, enter into that whole process of identifying the affliction within yourself and overcoming it, or at the very least diminishing it. Even a little bit is of a huge benefit. So let's do some breathing meditation. So in this, all we're going to do is just focus on the sensation of the breath, like the awareness of the breath, just coming in and going out. So, we sort of settle down to a point where we're just breathing in and out through the nostrils. But I think we sort of seek just that feeling of coming and going of the breath. The awareness of the coming and going of the breath, and we focus on that. So first of all, let all of the thoughts from your mind completely fall away and turn your attention onto the breath, and 100% keep it on the breath for the next couple of minutes. So you can just relax your concentration a little bit and just reflect on what happened in your meditation. So it's not uncommon that, we'll be daydreaming or just all over the place in our mind. And so let's repeat the same meditation. So we repeat exactly the same meditation, but recognizing that we have a strong tendency to be distracted, to daydream or to sleep or to be having conversations going on in our mind. And we'll just repeat the meditation, but having a very strong determination to just focus on the breath, just that awareness of the breath going in and coming out. Just that coming and going of the breath. So once again, just relax your concentration. And now what I'd like you to do is that, we've made quite a few assertions about the afflictions and how they work. So what I'd like you to do is we just spend 1 minute or so. We can pick, if you think you have a disposition towards one of the afflictions, or you can just pick one. And so just then to recall some incidents in your life, or some, even from today, some incident or some experience, and see if you can observe or recollect the role of that affliction. So whether it's anger or attachment or jealousy. So just recollect some incident in your life, something that actually happened, and sort of re-examine it from the point of view here of identifying the affliction within your own mind. So let's just spend a minute recollecting something and examining it this way. And then just bring your concentration back to the room. So this is something that you can do at the end of each day. At the end of each day, you can just reflect over your day and just see the way the maybe different afflictions had operated within today. So like within today, you can sort of recollect different interactions and see the way that the afflictions, how they've affected your interaction with others, even just today. So I think that can be beneficial to see that. So we've got time now for some discussion or questions. If anybody has anything they'd like to say. So in that case, I'll ask some questions about last week. You know, we talked about the suffering of change. Did anybody try to investigate that during the week, and how far did they have any success, or they think it's wrong, or... Change your seat. So, any others? Yeah?
I've been in the first 2 weeks, but I was just talking to someone today about anger, and I'm trying to reconcile the differences between anger and motivation. Say for something like a virtuous reason, like social change or something like that, and how sometimes anger is the initial thing that drives for a positive change or emancipate something. How do you wrap your head around that?
Yeah, so the question is about making social change. Let's say social change for the better, that some judgment is made that things would be better if we did this or did that, and then the motivation for it being anger. So I think the first point to make is that social change can be affected without anger being the motive. And I would think you could pick a couple of names. Buddha is one, Jesus Christ is another, Mahatma Gandhi I'll make as a third one. And possibly we could say Nelson Mandela as well. That great social changes were affected. And in Nelson Mandela's case in particular, he started off trying to make social change through anger, but eventually realised that anger and payback and retaliation was not the means to make good social change. And so he then abandoned, this may or may not be true, but certainly the portrayal is that he abandoned the path of anger as the means for social change. And I would think you would have to accept that both the Buddha and Jesus Christ affected huge social change, again without anger as a motive. And Mahatma Gandhi as well, that the adoption of non-harming in the process of social change was really the only thing that made his campaign successful. Because if he had used anger in his motivation for his social change, anger was something that the British well understood and could battle, but non-harmfulness was something they could not understand and they could not compete with. And that was why Mahatma Gandhi was successful. So, these are sort of things to understand, that in terms of social change and social activity, anger is not the only choice we have for our motivation. And that's a question to examine, that, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I just read a quote there recently that, and he's talking about the destruction of Buddhism in Tibet, and he said, the Chinese soldiers that came in and all that, they had the power of the gun, which appears to be so powerful, But he said, we have the power of truth, and ultimately the power of truth far exceeds the power of the gun. You know. So again, these are sort of things to look at. But for us, if we have an habituation to anger, we find it very hard to find anything else but anger to work from. Because, so whether it's on the sporting field or at the workplace or in our banter with our mates, even in the sort of mateship and sort of the way people interact with each other, when you have the habituation of anger, you end up having anger as your predominant tool of choice for the way you interact with others. And that will go when you try to engage in social change as well. You will think that anger is your only choice. So this is something to really to understand, is that one is that anger is not your only choice. Two is that it is probably not as effective as you think it is. And three is that using compassion or altruism or some really caring concern, loving kindness for others is actually a far more powerful motivation to have.
I was thinking of it also more saying less of a motivator is in a way to deal with something as much as it might have some parallels to empathy at the same time, and in your initial way that you interpret situations.
Yeah, so maybe anger is not quite the right word. That a dissatisfaction with the suffering that somebody else is going through. So that's not anger. So being dissatisfied or being unbearable, the unbearableness of somebody else's suffering, that sensation, that feeling, is compassion. You know, that the idea of compassion is that there is somebody else, and that person, you actually have some affection. Let's say you have some affection for them. Then when you see them suffer, that suffering, there's a sense of it being that you are unable to bear them suffering. And out of that you then act to resolve it. So the thing to understand here is that if you do not have the affection for that person, then no matter what level of suffering they're going through, you just don't care. Right? So the thing to understand in this is that compassion is not automatic for anybody. It's always based on some sense of affection or warmth or concern or whatever towards that person or that animal or the group or whatever it is. But if you lack that, you can see all the suffering in the world and you won't have a mere thought about it. So there's this necessary ingredient of that loving kindness, warmth, affection, connection to the person or the animal or the group or whatever who are suffering. And then on the basis of that, you then generate compassion, which is the wish for them to be free from that suffering or from that imprisonment or that treatment or that circumstance. But in that picture, there's no need for anger in that picture. You know.
So getting back to what you were saying before about anger, how do you differentiate between anger and say passion is the wish to?
Yes. See. Yeah, so the question is about how to differentiate. So we can look at the definitions, you know, from the Buddhist point of view. These terms are all defined. So we might be quite loose about what we call anger, or we might be quite loose about what we call passion, or we might be quite loose about what we call pride. You know, so before I made that distinction between two types of pride, you know, which is, when you talk about it, you see it's quite clear. They're very, very different. So here, making a distinction between anger and passion, you know, like whatever passion is. So anger is a thought wishing to harm. So you can just check in your own mind, you know, whether the you know, let's say in terms of social change or whatever, how present in your mind is the wish to harm the opponent? You know, the wish to actually harm them, the opponent, or the opposing forces, or the opposing viewpoint. So, you know, let's say if we look at the US at the moment, whatever the rights and wrongs about what's going on in US politics, the one thing that is clear is that the country is becoming more polarised and divisive. So there are things that are happening, you know, where they're sort of splitting up into people that follow the Republican side or the Democrat side. And independent of the rights and wrongs about it, that mere division and divisiveness is not good for any country. You know, any country that gets separated into different camps without cooperation and without discussion and engagement, it's destructive of the country's operation. And so that, to me, is like the endorsement of the angry mind, you know, that they're the enemy, you know, he's our friend, you know, he's our friend, he's the enemy. And that sort of divisiveness is not good for anybody, whether in a family or a country or the world or whatever. It's, you know. So to see that the mind that does that is seeing things in a very black and white, angry sort of way of dealing with things. It's sort of like there's only two switches. There's the angry switch, you're my enemy, or there's the attachment switch, you're my friend, and you're absolutely my friend, you know, absolutely loyal to me as my friend, and you're absolutely disgusting as my enemy, and they're the only two choices. Well, that's not good for anybody, you know. And so you can see that it's very easy to destroy something with those afflicted states of mind.
So I suppose it's sort of referring to that initial response. Like, for example, if someone was angry that one person had done something to another person, they might not directly want to harm them, but it's just that initial response.
So they're not wanting to harm them, or they are wanting to harm them?
Well, they might be angry. I don't know, so
Well, this is a question that I really am asking you to examine. That what you think is anger, you have to look at it and see what is the characteristic of that thought. You have to really see what is the characteristic of that thought. So from a Buddhist point of view, the definition of anger is a mind, it's a state of mind. It's not necessarily physical action or speech. It's a state of mind wishing to harm. Now, you might convince yourself that, well, I don't really want to see them hurt, but I wouldn't mind seeing them humiliated, or I wouldn't mind seeing them taken into the boss's office and given a good talking to, or I wouldn't mind seeing them tripping on their fur coat and falling over, you know, or you know, like, yeah. Or I wouldn't mind seeing if they just disappeared. You know, I don't care where they go, just so long as they go, you know. Well, that's the question you need to check. Is that a mind wishing harm on that person? That's something to check. You know, so, and look, this is what I say. I used to think I didn't have any anger. Okay, I looked and I discovered I had a lot of anger. So I would recommend you have a good look yourself before you say these things are not anger. So, yeah, Mark. Yeah.
So I just experienced this. So sometimes I see people as my enemy, and then I feel compelled to make them my friend.
Yeah.
And then eventually, like, when I fail
Yeah.
two things. So could you explain how that overlaps?
Yeah, so what Mark is talking about is that at times he sort of recognises that he might have the thought that somebody is your enemy. You know, you have that thought. And so he makes an effort to make them my friend. You know, I'm going to make an effort to make you my friend. And then when that doesn't work out, you know, they don't accept that advance, or they don't accept that friendship. You know, I'm giving you friendship here. They don't accept it. Then when they don't accept it, then you resent that, and you then wish some harm on them. Okay, so this is good to learn from, that this is the way we try to control the world, and we try to have everything suit our little thing. It's quite reasonable that somebody will not like me. I can tell you, that's quite reasonable, you know. Okay, and I can tell you it's quite reasonable that a lot of people may not like me. Okay, but here we're talking about my attitude to them, not their attitude to me. Okay, so that's one thing always to be clear about. So anger is my attitude to them. Then you try to reverse that, but what you've got is you've actually got an expectation of their attitude to you, which you cannot control. So conquering anger is relevant equally to the nice people who respond to you trying to make an effort to conquer your anger and then show you affection and warmth in return, and also to the not so nice people who don't care that you're making an effort, and so they don't respond. Right? Although it's quite likely if you overcome your anger, others will respond positively, but there's no guarantee. And so we have to overcome anger towards both the nice people who respond really positively and give us warmth and affection back, and to the not so nice people who do not respond so positively, but in my mind I still have to overcome anger within my mind. You know, so having that expectation that, oh, I'm going to overcome my anger and they will think I'm great. Well, they may not think you're great, you know. And so we then still have to deal with the anger, even in the face of others not responding. So I think this is where the stories, you know, from the concentration camps and the, you know, prisoners of war stuck in different countries for 30 years or whatever, and tortured and treated badly. And there's great stories of people who realised the value of love and the value of overcoming anger in those circumstances, and irrespective of whether they changed the behaviour of the other person or not, they defeated anger within themselves. And that's what they found to be extraordinarily valuable, without the expectation that it had to change the other person. Because that expectation that you will somehow, the other person will see the good work that you're doing and they'll man up and show you some warmth and affection, well, there's no guarantee about that at all. So we have to have that courage that I will overcome my own anger no matter what. And that's why those stories from the prisoners of war or people in the concentration camps that managed to overcome their anger and hatred completely are so inspiring. Because even in the face of great difficulty, including torture and mistreatment and all that, they managed to maintain their patience and their love for others. So that's why those stories are so inspiring. Yeah. Okay, we'll end on that note. And so just imagine, we'll just finish with a quick meditation, which I like to do. So the meditation I do here, it's part of what is called a dedication meditation. So we're sort of dedicating our efforts tonight. And because we're dedicating them in this way, we're sort of, or we're directing our efforts in a certain direction. And so the direction that we're trying to dedicate towards is the benefit of others. So that's the reason I do this meditation. So imagine that the benefit of all of us coming together, meditating, talking, listening together is something really special, and it takes the form of a ball of white light in the middle of the room, and then you bring that above your own head. You imagine all of the benefit from everybody here tonight comes above your own head, and you let it pour down into you, completely filling your body and filling your mind. And then all that benefit collects at your heart in the form of a big light egg, an egg-shaped light, just completely light. You know, all the benefit of tonight taking this form of light. And you feel completely clear, pacified, open, free of all difficulties, mentally and physically, completely free of all difficulties. And really enjoy that state. And then thinking of everybody else here in the room, thinking that they all want to have happiness, but in fact they lack happiness, and they all want to be free from suffering, but in fact they have to endure suffering. So then with that thought, imagine rays of light go out from the egg-shaped light at your heart to everybody else here in the room, and bring them everything they require to overcome their suffering and to develop their happiness. So the light fills their bodies, fills their mind, they experience great happiness and a complete freedom from suffering. Similarly to your family or those close to you, your work colleagues, anybody you associate with regularly, to your enemies, people that you dislike or people that you wish harm normally. Here you see that they are like everybody else. They want happiness and they want to be free from suffering, but in fact they lack happiness and they endure suffering. And so rays of light go out to everybody like this, bringing them into happiness and freeing them from suffering. And we can extend this visualization to include every living being. So imagine in front of you every single living being. We can put them all in the form of humans. So a vast ocean of living beings, all of them exactly the same, wanting to be happy and wanting to be free from suffering. But they don't have that. And so imagine the rays of light go right out to every living being and bring them happiness and bring them freedom from suffering. Then imagine the rays of light return and dissolve back into yourself. So to take a great delight at being able to visualize this, something to be very joyful about. Okay, so thank you very much. I'll be back next Monday